Welcome back to our study on the patriarchs, the story of these men in Genesis that God took under his wing and gave an opportunity for them to grow as human beings, to overcome failures and problems in their life. In this series, we've been looking at how each of these men had a particular issue that they struggled with throughout their life, yet God remained faithful to give them an opportunity to remedy that, to change that aspect about their life, and to become the man that God had intended them to be. We started off with Abraham, looking at how he had weak faith, and God gave him an opportunity to demonstrate a trust in God that led to a stronger faith. In fact, Abraham became known as the father of faith. Then we looked at Lot and Isaac as examples of people who did not take advantage of the opportunities God gave them, and they either lost their position with God or simply became stagnant. But today we're going to look at the fourth man in the series, beginning today and finishing up in our next lesson, which is another person who did take advantage of the opportunities God put in his path to become a better person, become the man that God intended him to be. And that is Jacob. Jacob is the son of Isaac, one of the two sons of Isaac. He, in fact, was the younger son of Isaac. Isaac and Rebekah had twin boys named Jacob and Esau. Esau was actually born first, and Jacob born second. So Jacob was the younger son, even though they were twins. And he becomes the person through whom God passes down the covenant promises that were made to Abraham. We'll begin picking up the story in Genesis chapter 25, in the middle of the chapter, and we'll read about how Isaac and Rebekah had trouble having children, and through prayer, God blessed them with these sons. And even from the beginning of their childhood, we start to see their nature show out, even at the point of their birth. So, if we pick up in Genesis chapter 25 and verse 20, it says, "And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. And Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated by him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it is so, why am I like this? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from you. The one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob." We've already kind of talked about this in the discussion we had on Isaac, about how Isaac and Rebekah ended up playing favorites between their sons. But now we want to focus on the boys themselves. We see that both of them were born as twins at the same time, Esau coming out first. He is called Esau because he was at birth covered in red hair. And Esau means red in the original language that was spoken at that time. And so they called him Esau. But holding on to his heel as they came out of the womb was Jacob. And Jacob literally translates to one who grasps the heel, but it has deeper meaning as well. And that meaning leads us into an understanding of what Jacob's problem was that he dealt with and fought throughout his life. The problem that God gives him an opportunity to overcome. So if we look at Jacob's main failure, what we're going to see him struggle with throughout his life until he submits it to God, until God gives him an opportunity to deal with it, is lies and deceit. We said Jacob's name means one who grasps the heel, But that was a saying in that day that meant something else. It meant supplanter, or one who takes the position or place of another by force or by scheming, some of that nature. And so Jacob, even from the beginning, from the birth of Jacob, he is called a schemer, a supplanter, someone who's going to take advantage of someone else and replace them. And Jacob does that through lies and deceit at the beginning of his life. He even fulfills that name by taking his brother's place as the heir of God's promises. Typically in this culture, the oldest child would receive the promise that had been given by God, that it would be passed down, the blessing passed down from father to oldest son. And so Esau, being the firstborn, should have received the blessing from Isaac and the inheritance of the promises of God. But what we'll see as we go forward is that Jacob actually is the one that receives those promises. We'll see how that plays out in a moment. In fact, the very first time we see Jacob in action, they skip their childhood. They're older now, in their 20s, 30s maybe. And in the very end of chapter 25, we see the first action of Jacob. And that action is one that he is supplanting or taking the place of another by scheming or by force, through deceit or through just trickery and taking advantage of his brother. So let's pick up in Genesis 25, verse 29, right where we left off earlier. And it says, "And Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field and was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray you, with that same red stew, for I am faint. And therefore his name was called Edom." Once again, they're making a connection between his name meaning red and this red stew that he wanted that Jacob had made. And Jacob, verse 31, said, "Sell me today your birthright." The birthright was what I talked about earlier, that the oldest child would receive a greater inheritance, would receive usually double a share of the wealth of the father at the time of inheritance, would receive 2 portions to everybody else's 1. But more than that, the birthright included the inheritance of the special relationship with God. And so Jacob is asking for Esau's birthright in exchange for a pot of stew that is a very high price. We can say that we've bought many expensive things that were cost more than they were really worth in our lifetime probably, but I don't know that we can ever say we sold out a birthright for a pot of stew. And that's actually what Esau does. In verse 32, Esau says, "Behold, I am at the point of death. What profit shall this birthright do me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And Esau swore unto him and sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils, and he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. We see 2 different things in the nature of these young men in this story. It closes the passage we just read with Esau despised his birthright. Notice he's coming in, he's faint, he's tired, he's been working in the fields all day, and there's stew here, he's ready to eat, he wants to eat, and he asks his brother for a pot of the stew, and his brother says, "I'll give it to you, but you got to give me your birthright. You have to give me everything you are going to inherit. You have to give me your position. You have to give me the special relationship with God that you're going to inherit. I want it all for a pot of stew." And Esau's reaction would not be what most of us would go like, "That is crazy. I'm not going to do that." Most of us, even no matter how hungry we were, would react with disbelief, would react that this is a terrible bargain. I'm not going to agree to this. But Esau exaggerates his current situation. In verse 32, Esau says, "Behold, I'm at the point of death." No, he wasn't. He was tired. He had been working. Yes, he had had a long, difficult, hard day, but he wasn't at the point of death. He wasn't going to die if he didn't eat this stew. But what about us? How often do we put ourselves into a position where we have to make a decision and we exaggerate the problem? And we say, I am about to die. This is terrible. Everything is as bad as it can possibly be. When it's really not. It's really just a bad, tough day, a difficult day. But we exaggerate the problem, and that changes our focus. Esau did not focus on the eternal, on receiving a relationship with God and the blessings that came with it. Instead, he focused on the temporary. I am hungry right now, and I want this stew. And we can easily look down on him for that and talk bad about Esau, but I think if we really analyze our situation, we find that we do that ourselves far more often than we would like to admit. That we look on the temporary problems that we're faced in life and the difficulty of our job or our relationships or whatever it may be, and we exaggerate it to the saying, this is the point of death. And look on a temporary solution. Like Esau said, I want this stew right now. I'm about to die. Let me eat. A very temporary solution. How often do we look at a temporary solution of a different job, or people who say, I need a new spouse because they're having a conflict with their current spouse, or they're looking for a new thing to buy that they think will bring them happiness. But those are temporary solutions to an eternal situation. And we need to look with eternal eyes. We need to look at the true value of the birthright we have as Christians. That when we become a Christian, we become heirs and joint heirs with Christ. We have access to all of the riches and benefits and blessings of heaven. Yes, we're going to have tough days. Yes, there's going to be times when our flesh rises up or Satan attacks and we struggle. But we have to keep our focus on the eternal so that we don't end up giving up the things of God for a pot of stew. So the first thing we see is how Esau despises his birthright and treats it as something not worth having. But we also can see Jacob as a supplanter, as one who is scheming and taking his brother's position, cheating his brother out of his birthright, asking a price that is way too high. What does that say about Jacob's nature? That he is willing to treat his own brother in such a wicked way as to cheat him and charge a price so far above what it should be. Esau doesn't have the right attitude towards his responsibilities as the oldest child, as the one who would inherit the promises of God. But Jacob doesn't have the right attitude either. He has the attitude that it's okay to cheat my brother. It's okay to ask this high price for just a pot of stew. And it shows Jacob's scheming nature, the lies and deceit he's willing to go to get what he wants. Once again, we need to examine ourselves and look at the way we're living our life. Do we see it as a light thing to cheat someone, even a brother or sister in Christ, to cheat someone by asking more than something's worth, or to go about with edgy business practices, or cheat on our taxes, or to lie to someone? I've known of business people who claim to be Christian who would tell someone that they could complete a job by a certain date or for a certain price, knowing full well they couldn't. And they said, well, it's just business, it's okay, everybody does it. Just because everybody does it doesn't mean it's right. We must live to a higher standard, live to the eternal standard, live to the standard of the one that is going to inherit the special relationship with God. But Jacob doesn't do that either. He is willing to cheat, he's willing to lie, he's willing to deceive to get what he wants. So from the very first place we see Jacob in action, we see his nature as a scheming nature that God needs to deal with. That if Jacob is truly going to be the person to live in relationship with God, to carry the blessings of God down to the next generation, then God is going to have to work with Jacob to overcome this issue of lies and deceit. The most powerful time that we see this deceit rise up in Jacob's life is in Genesis chapter 27. If we skip 26, we go into 27. And we talked about this when we dealt with Isaac. It is the deception of Isaac. And we often will try to chalk it up to youthful inexperience. We think, people who are young are willing to do things that aren't quite right. No, Jacob and Esau were 77 at the time of this story. Many people don't realize that. Esau had already been married. He'd married 2 heathen women. Jacob is actually still single. But this was not unusual at a time when men lived to be 175, 180 years old. Abraham and Isaac both lived to at least 175 years old. So timing was a little different than it is nowadays because of the length of that life. But Jacob and Esau are currently 77 years old. They're not youngsters. They've got some life experience. And at this point, Isaac has, as we said before, decided he's done. He is going to pass on the blessings from God to the next generation. That was Isaac's failure. We talked about that in our previous lesson. But now he is going to pass these blessings on. Now, I feel sure that Isaac knew about the story of the stew. I feel confident that Isaac knew Esau had sold his birthright to Jacob, and that the blessing should go to Jacob legally because of the price of the stew. But when we look in chapter 27, we find at the very first verse that Isaac ignores that. In verse 1 it says, "And it came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said to him, 'My son.' And Esau said, 'Here I am.' And Isaac said, 'Behold, now I am old and do not know the day of my death. Take therefore, I pray you, your weapons, your quiver, your bow. Go out to the field and take me some venison and make me savory meat such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die.'" So Isaac has decided to ignore the agreement made between Jacob and Esau about the birthright, and he's going to bless Esau anyway because Esau is his favorite. Now at this point, Rebekah overhears it and tells Jacob about it and says, "Look, we're going to deceive your father." In verse 8, Rebekah says, "Now therefore, my son," talking to Jacob, "obey my voice according to what I command you. Go to the flock, fetch from there 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for your father, such as he loves. And you will bring it to your father, that he may eat and that he may bless you before his death." And Jacob notices immediately the problems with this. Now, he's not really against the plan. He's just trying to solve any problems that may result. He's still a man full of lies and deceit. He still wants to supplant his brother. But he notices some issues that are going to come up. And he doesn't want to say, "No, I'm not going to deceive my father." Instead, he's like, how can we fix this? How can we overcome the problems? In verse 11, it says, "Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, 'Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will seem to him as a deceiver, and will bring a curse upon me and not a blessing.' And his mother said unto him, 'Upon me be your curse, my son. Obey my voice and fetch them.' So he went and fetched them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory meat, such as his father loved. And Rebekah took good clothes from her oldest son Esau that were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob her younger son, and put the skins of the kids of the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. And she gave the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob." So we see here Jacob is deceiving his father, but he's pushed to it by his mother. How often do we let people lead us into a way we should not go, especially people we love? We have to be very careful, even with family members, even with people we love, leading us astray and leading us into doing things we should not do. Here, Jacob's mother is pushing him to deceive Isaac. She's making the savory meat herself out of the goats, and then gives him clothes from Esau that will smell like Esau. Gives him the skin of the goats, which I always say, how hairy is Esau? if the goat skin is what's going to convince Isaac. And so she helps him do all this, and Jacob goes along with it. He takes the savory meat and goes into his father, deceives him. So this is the biggest issue we have with Jacob and the deceit, is that he plots with his mother to deceive Isaac. And that deception is for the blessing that Isaac will pass on. This is an official passing on of the leadership of the family. What Jacob is really asking for is what we would today consider a major promotion in the company. You know, if you consider this family as being like a business, Jacob is asking to be promoted to CEO. This is basically Isaac, the head guy of the family, the patriarch, the CEO of this company, is retiring. He said, I'm putting it down. And Jacob is ready to jump several levels up and to become the CEO himself, and he's willing to deceive to do that. And so Jacob goes in, he brings the food, Isaac eats the food, but he recognizes that it doesn't really seem like Esau. Now Isaac is blind, but it doesn't seem like Esau. So he starts asking questions. And in verse 20, Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly?" Found the game, the meat, so quickly. And Jacob said, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me." And Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near, I pray you, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are truly Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, and he felt him. And Isaac said to himself, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And he said, "Are you truly my son Esau?" And Jacob said, "I am." And we go on to where he smells Jacob. He smells the clothes that were Esau's clothes, so it smells like Esau. Isaac tries to check it out, but repeatedly we see Jacob directly lie to Isaac. You know, he lies about God bringing the meat to him. Remember, Esau was going to go out and hunt it, whereas Jacob just went to the flock and got a pair of kids from the flock. And so he says, "The Lord your God brought it to me." And even in a very small sentence like that, in verse 20, we can notice something here. He says, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me quickly." We see here that Jacob does not have a relationship with God. He calls God the Lord your God, Isaac's God, not my God. And we'll see as we go through the story of Jacob how that changes, that Jacob comes to know God for himself as he deals with this issue of lying and deceiving. But throughout it all, Jacob here is lying directly to Isaac. "The Lord your God brought the meat to me." Isaac says, "Are you truly my son Esau?" And Jacob says, "I am." Several times throughout this passage, Jacob directly lies to get what he wants, and he does deceive Isaac. Even though Isaac says, "This sounds like Jacob, this is Jacob's voice," Isaac is deceived into giving Jacob the blessing. I want to take a little side note here. Notice what Isaac doesn't do. He doesn't stop the process. He doesn't pray about it. He doesn't seek for direction. He just goes on with, he says, "It doesn't sound right. Something seems wrong here, but I'm going to bless him anyway." We need to learn to take a very close look at situations when we have that check within our spirit, the discernment of the spirit that the Holy Ghost brings within our life, that something isn't right. We notice something seems off in a situation. Don't just push through. Take the time to pray about it, fast about it, seek the wisdom of God about the situation, and come to a wise decision to know the truth before you act. Isaac doesn't do that. He knows the voice is Jacob's, but he is deceived by everything else and chooses to go on through with blessing whoever this person is here that he isn't entirely sure about. In our situation, so often we will just want to get it done and press through and make something happen, and we don't stop when the Holy Spirit checks us about something. We don't take a step back when we should, and as a result, we end up making poor decisions like Isaac does. So we need to be more careful about that. Isaac does bless Jacob. In verse 26, his father Isaac said unto him, Come now, near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his garment, and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore God give you of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be he that blesses you. This is the blessing that Jacob was trying to get for the chapter 25 and chapter 27 that we've read. This is what he sold the stew to Esau for. This is what he deceived his father for. And in our modern world, we say, well, it's just 3 or 4 verses of saying some nice things about a guy. But we have to understand that what we speak carries weight in the spiritual world. That when we speak as a representative of God, as a Christian on this earth, we have that right. We have the authority given to us by Christ. In the day we're reading here in Genesis, the relationship that God had given to Abraham and then passed down to Isaac gave Isaac an authority to speak on God's behalf these blessings over someone, and that what he proclaimed would be done by God and would bring about an actuality within his life of these blessings. So Isaac is speaking with the authority of God and saying that Jacob would be blessed with physical benefits of good crops, good flocks, good wealth, with authority and power over other people. He says, let other people bow down to you, including your brothers. So what Isaac has done is made Jacob the head of the family, given him authority over Esau in this family. This is why Esau is going to get very upset by the end of this, because he knows what this blessing entails. Even though he did not respect it enough and sold it for a pot of stew, he recognizes what it really is. He recognizes that he must now obey his brother, that his brother makes the decisions for this family now. And so this makes Jacob the primary heir of Isaac's wealth. He's going to get more inheritance than Esau will. It makes him the head of the family over Esau. It makes him the beneficiary of God's covenant. The end of verse 29 carries on the blessings that God spoke over Abraham that was passed down to Isaac. It's now being passed to Jacob, where it says, cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be everyone that blesses you. This is that relationship with God that brings about cursing and blessing not only to us, but to those around us. So Jacob has actually received a spiritual standing with God and within the family as a result of this blessing. We can again go back to the analogy of this is a CEO who has retired and has now named his successor. And naming that successor as Jacob changed the order of the company. It should have been Esau, but it ends up being Jacob. Esau gets this feeling of being passed over for promotion. And so if we were to read the rest of chapter 27, we would find that as soon as Jacob receives this blessing and leaves his father's tent, Esau comes in with everything ready. He's ready to receive the blessing, and the mistake that Isaac made comes out. Isaac recognizes what's happened and has no blessing left. He can't undo what he's already spoken over Jacob because he spoke it with the authority of God. And so he cannot change that. He can only add a couple of things to Esau, including that Esau would come out from under the rulership of Jacob eventually. So as a result, we see problems arise in this family. In verse 41, it says, "And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing his father had blessed him with. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will slay my brother Jacob." So bad results, evil results from the deception that Jacob pursues in this. Esau swears to kill his brother. He says, "My father is about to die and we will mourn for him. And after my father dies, I'm going to kill Jacob for taking everything from me." Now, again, Esau has somehow managed to miss the idea that he sold this away earlier, but feels like it's still his right to have anyway. But he is determined to kill Jacob when Isaac dies. As a result, Rebekah, mom, once again, hears what Esau is saying, that he's going to kill Jacob, his brother. And Rebekah is concerned, is worried that her favorite, that Jacob will die. So she convinces Isaac to send Jacob away with the purpose of finding a wife. She claims that the reason is that Esau's heathen wives who don't believe in God are a terrible thing in this family, and she's weary because of it. And she says, "I don't want Jacob to marry a heathen woman. Let's send him back to my brother," Rebekah's brother Laban, in Padan Aram, and says, "Let's send him back there to find a wife there from our family that believes in God." Now, this is really just an excuse to get Jacob away from Esau. And as a result, Jacob flees. He knows his brother's going to kill him. He doesn't know when Isaac's going to die, but he knows as soon as Isaac dies, Esau's ready to kill him. His mother makes this plan, so once again, he goes with his mother's plan, and he flees to Padan Aram. And so Jacob's cheating, his lying, his deception harms everyone. Isaac has ended up giving the blessing to the wrong person. Esau's so mad he's going to kill Jacob, and Rebekah has lost her favorite son because now he has to flee and go hundreds of miles away to another country. When we practice lies and deceit, we bring negativity, destruction, conflict, problems within our life and the lives of those around us. And so, if we really study through this, Rebekah never sees her son again. The son that was her favorite, the one that she schemed with to get the blessing for, she ends up losing him because of the deception. Isaac loses one of his sons. Jacob has conflict with his brother and has to flee. As far as we know, he never sees his mother again. He sees his father again and his brother, but not his mother, not the one that loved him and schemed with him so much. So when we deceive, we end up harming ourselves. So this is a problem that Jacob faced. It was deep-seated, deep-rooted within his life. We saw him try to cheat his brother by selling him a stew for a birthright. And we see him deceive his father, and now he's having to flee, and it involves deception on his mother's part as well. But God is so faithful, and that's something I want us to understand throughout this whole series, that even in our problems, even in our struggles, even in our difficulty, God remains faithful to give us opportunity to remedy that, to come to Him and accept His change on our behalf, to root out those negative things in our life, and to bring us into the location and the relationship with God that we need to have. And we see this immediately as Jacob flees from his brother. In chapter 28, the very next chapter, after Jacob has to run away from Esau, we find God meeting Jacob and giving him an opportunity to change. So, in the first part of chapter 28, Isaac sends Jacob away. He tells him, go get a wife from your mother's family back in Padan Aram. In verse 4, he reiterates the blessing. He says, the blessing of, and may God give to you the blessing of Abraham and to your seed with you, that you may inherit the land wherein you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. We see yet again in verse 4 that the blessing Jacob got, he did a terrible thing to get it, but it included that relationship with God. Now, if that blessing from Abraham and that relationship with God is going to play out in Jacob's life, then Jacob has to change. And we need to understand that. We may come from a family that has a relationship with God, but if we are going to be a vessel to carry that relationship forward, then we have to personally build that relationship with God. We cannot rely on the previous generations. We saw that last week with Isaac. And so Jacob goes to Padan Aram, and he leaves, and he goes on this journey. It's a several 100-mile journey to get there. And as he does, in verse 10, it says, and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and rested there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it as his pillow and laid down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your seed. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in you and in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with you, and will keep you in all places wherever you go, and will bring you again into this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you of. So here, Jacob gets something very special. He gets a visit from God. It's God's faithfulness to this covenant. He meets with Jacob. He calls Jacob to a life of relationship with him, showing him this dream of a ladder or a staircase leading into heaven. He's showing Jacob it is possible to have a relationship with me. Just as the angels are ascending and descending on this staircase, it is possible to communicate with God, to go up and go down and have a relationship with him. How will Jacob respond? Well, in verse 16, Jacob wakes up. And Jacob awoke out of his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. He was afraid. And he said, how awesome is this place? This is nothing but the house of God and the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had placed as his pillow and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. And he called the name of the place Bethel, which means house of God. But the name of that city was called Luz at first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you shall give me I will surely give a tenth unto you. Jacob makes a tentative agreement to live with God. He's put a lot of ifs on God here. He says, if God will protect me, and he'll keep me, and he'll do what he said, then I will serve him. It's not quite the right relationship we need to have, but it's a start. And many of us, that's where we have to start. How many of us started because we wanted something out of God? We first started calling to God because we wanted something, or even we wanted to escape hell and make it into heaven. For many people, that is the start of a relationship, and God is faithful and merciful to allow us to start there. But we must go on from that. And what we're going to see in our next lesson is how God helps Jacob mature from this tentative point he gave him a vision. He called Jacob to relationship, and Jacob said, okay, if God does what he says, then I'll let him be my God. God is so gracious. He's going to give Jacob a chance to become a man of faith with the right relationship. It's going to take some work, and it's going to take rooting out that spirit of lies and deceit that lie within Jacob. But God is merciful enough and faithful enough to let that happen, to make it happen, so that Jacob becomes the person he is supposed to be, the one God wants him to be. And so we're going to see that as we go on into our next lesson. I would ask, as we go forward for next week, if you would please read Genesis chapters 29 through 33. And that will lead us into the next set of lessons, Genesis 29 to 33, as we see God continue to be faithful to give Jacob a chance to change and become the person that he's intended to be. Remember, as we go through it, this is also an image of what God does for us, and that we need to see in the story of Jacob how God is dealing with us. Maybe we have been people who have lied and deceived others, but God will be faithful to give us an opportunity to change as well. So let's remember that. Read those chapters as we go forward to next week. Thank you for being a part of tonight's lesson.